I think that's something that folks have to really start looking at is how do you institutionalize it? Because again, this isn't about the technology, it's about the people. And it's getting the folks to continue moving that forward because otherwise it's just going to be a couple leaders pushing it. And again, it's a tool we can buy. And once you get that, then I think we can get beyond just the automation pieces, which are hugely valuable, but we can get to the transformation piece because that's when you're giving an individual, like a salesperson, if we're giving them that personal sales coach, and maybe we're actually standing something up, let's say it's a pharmaceutical sales rep, they can talk to a virtual doctor. Video avatars exist right now. They're talking to a virtual oncologist because they're selling a cancer drug. They can practice their pitch. They can get real-time feedback on what I said about the medication and did I follow our process. I've just allowed that human to do incredible things they never did before. To me, that's the type 2 opportunity. That's our 10Xs as organizations, is where we hit those superpower capabilities for our whole team.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business.
Hey there.
Hey, there he is.
How you doing?
Awesome. Alex, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Excited to be jumping in with you. Want to make sure that this view was okay, the audio is okay, all of that.
The audio is great. I'm sure it's going to take people to get a while to get used to the view.
The virtual me, I get it. Totally get it. Yep.
How did you show up for this show as a virtual you? And how do we know when we're seeing virtual you and real you?
So I'm currently using my Apple Vision Pro. And as a part of actually when you buy one of these things, you actually end up scanning yourself. And it takes a couple of pictures and it creates the 3-dimensional version of yourself here. And then you can use that when you're connecting in via video or if you're FaceTiming with people, you can actually see a 3D person standing there next to you. So it was, and for me, connecting via flat is, I'm glad we've had it, but it's time for us to start getting past that. So I'm really excited to dive in with folks to explore, how can we make this more human?
So you're essentially, right now you're seeing yourself in 3D versus just a flat version of yourself.
So I don't see myself at all. I've got this on my head. I can see my hands in front of me when I'm doing this, and they're doing the same thing you see. I've got you in a window kind of in front of me here. I've got some notes over there. I've got my Mac screen over there, and they're just kind of floating here in my office.
I know, since we met, about a year ago in Chicago, which was, only a couple of months after you got the Apple Vision Pro, you were already all over it. And it looks like that enthusiasm hasn't waned much.
Oh, not at all. No, if anything, it's accelerating like crazy. I actually just got off of an Apple partner call, and for me, that's been the exciting part. Is that we, as a 15-year Apple partner, we've been able to really dive into this. And like when the iPhone first came out, here was this thing, and nobody knew what to do with it, and eventually, it changed the world. With the Vision Pro, Apple's done a lot to try to say, hey, this is going to change the world, and here's a taste. So they're foreshadowing in a way that I've never seen them do before, which is just amazing.
Okay, so we're going to sort of move away from the Apple Vision Pro stuff for a little bit, but I'm very pleased that we finally have our first guest who has appeared.
Your spatial guest.
That's right, on the RevOps Champions podcast. Not really as themselves, but they are really themselves. I mean, it's you. It's just not you the same way that people are seeing me. Alex, great to have you on the show. One of the other things I had in my notes as I was thinking about how I was going to greet you today. So I heard a few weeks ago that people are starting to refer to you as the Dan Sullivan of tech. Now, I know that. So for those people, we're obviously both big Dan Sullivan fans, you and I. So for the people who don't know who Dan Sullivan is, that's obviously one heck of a compliment.
Absolutely is super flattering, and the way I have to take that is that I think he is a great simplifier who is really helping people through huge business challenges and business thinking. And that's what I try to do. I'm a geek who applies technology to help people thrive at work. So how do we make that real and practical? Because otherwise the tech doesn't matter.
I actually, well, I love that as a segue, because a lot of what we talk about on this show, with RevOps being a hot topic that we talk about, but we very seldom talk about RevOps as a whole. We're typically talking about the components of what makes a RevOps model successful in a business, and even for I always preface this in every episode where we talk about RevOps, for the folks who don't yet know what RevOps is. You're most likely doing a lot of the things that we talk about. We've just given it a name, and essentially what RevOps is about is moving your marketing ops, your sales ops, your marketing ops, and all the data processes and technology that run through that revenue team. And we build one team to support the entire customer journey. So we say, the people, the processes, the data, and the technology that essentially run your customer facing teams in your organization is what we call RevOps. And then on each episode, we might dive into each of those components. I'm guessing, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is going to be heavier on the technology side. But I know you, I mean, as a successful entrepreneur and business person yourself, you absolutely understand the fact, and you just talked about it, is you're trying to help people use tech better in their everyday lives and or in business. But you know that it's absolutely, almost impossible to do that if the processes, the clarity around the data, and then all the sort of cultural things that go with having good people. Without those, the technology really isn't going to do you much good.
The tech doesn't matter if you don't have the fundamentals. Absolutely, and it's all of that stuff coming together. And I think that's a little bit of my secret sauce, and our secret sauce is when we lean in with folks is really, yeah, here's the technology, but what are the processes? Where's the friction? How are we dealing with that? What does a week in a life for this human being actually look like? And then we can weave the threads together, because without that, the tech doesn't matter. It's just shiny.
And it's interesting because we talk about this a lot right now, because when at this time of the year, of course, when one year is ending and another year starts, we're often reflecting, on the past. And one of the things that we reflect on at Dynamico is, why did we start Dynamico? And the question at the very core of why we started Dynamico, which is what led to our name, which is a Spanish or Italian play on the word dynamic, was that we would, when the strategist who was helping us come up with the name kept saying, well, how are you going to help your clients? What do you essentially do? What is the value you bring? And we said, well, we're gonna help small and mid-sized businesses navigate evolving technology in order to stay connected to their customers, which they need to do in order to continue to grow. Right.
And I love that, because that's where it matters.
Right. And all that's happened with all the hype around, AI in the last year. We reflected on that again recently and was like, well, in fact, it's still absolutely true to what we're doing, except right now the technology is very much focused on AI, whereas in the last 5 years the technology was focused more on CRM and having integrated systems, to help businesses grow. So how would you? I mean, do you think there are any differences, or what are the differences in technology, AI as technology versus technology before it was called AI?
I love that. I was actually just given a workshop yesterday, and we were covering, this is one of the core tenets, is that if we think back to the one I'll use is the old-fashioned icebox, pre-electricity. Ice had to be delivered. We kept food cold in that thing, and most folks don't remember that. And then we had electricity, and we got refrigerators and everything else in the kitchen, and it changed everything. It changed the entire supply chain. It changed the entire ecosystem. Fast forward, we had the internet, And most folks today can't imagine what their business would be like without the internet. That's the level of change that AI is bringing us. Is this is going to change everything woven in for every individual. Um, I am a big champion of AI is supposed to be about how do we give our teams superpowers, not how do I replace them. And there are different thoughts out there, but that's what I'm really focused on is how do we actually help people, because it's when the entire team is able to embrace a new technology. And I think that's one of the differences. In the old days, it was, okay, we had the web person, we had the app person, we had the tech person. We can put AI in the hands of every single team member and they can run with it. And that's different than, hey, look, cool, here's Excel, everybody go use it. No, this is fundamental. I can use it in every single task that I'm involved in. But the only time we get those big changes is if we involve the whole team thinking about it.
And of course, and I'm guessing there are a lot of people who are going to be listening to this, to you and I talk about this. What are the recommendations you give to business leaders who are trying to figure out, how to build their communication and policy, et cetera, around their people using AI?
So that one's easy for me because I just published a book on that this week, Practical AI for Leaders. Thank you. And it's really about our journey and trying to just share. I'm a big believer in learning out loud. Of hey, we have to share our learnings. And right now, it's not about the technology. It's about the culture shift necessary for our organizations to actually embrace the technology. So we spent essentially 2 quarters, third quarter of last year. And that was all about, again, learning out loud. It was experimenting. We had every single member of our team. We have weekly town hall meetings. We had everybody spend 4 hours, just 4 hours over an entire quarter, try a tool, try an experiment. And then every single person gave a 3-minute presentation on what did I try, what was the tool, what worked and what didn't, and any recommendation I would make to the team. And it was a 1-page slide, super simple. It didn't matter if you were in accounting or sales or engineering, everybody did that. Then followed by, great, now we can put a team together and start digging into how do we embrace AI. But it was that first quarter of embracing, experimenting, celebrating the wins, celebrating all right, that tool's not going to work. That's the key. And again, it's getting the whole team. It's not, as leaders, we can't just point at somebody saying, you're the IT person, figure it out.
Yeah. That's very, that's very similar to, and I'm glad that because, I've already learned a lot from you. But I'm glad that we're kind of doing things very similarly here, with experimenting, and it's interesting because so we run on EOS, and I had a rock last quarter around AI, and I have another rock around this quarter around AI.
As should everybody.
Yes, yes. And as a minimum, I guess, right?
Yes.
And so, for those of you who don't know what a rock is, it's a 90-day initiative that one person takes on to move forward and help the business improve in over a 90-day period. And it's interesting because we've been doing all this experimenting across all functions in our business, and and I've been interviewing all the folks on the team. So whether they're in marketing or sales or delivery, of course, they're all using different tools and for different tasks, which is exactly the point, right? We're just trying to learn, and we've very quick, and in our, let's say, in our more analog type business, which is technology, all technology that we implement and integrate and optimize for our clients that is not yet AI. One of the biggest things that we help our clients with is managing and avoiding tech bloat, right? So having multiple tools that you're paying for, many of which actually do the same as something else that you're already paying for. And we very quickly realized that that was not going to go away with AI. In fact, it's just going to accelerate. To your point.
It's 100 times worse. There's 100 new tools every day, and that's the trap I keep seeing folks fall into: is what's the best tool for X, as opposed to what we have to get really good at is we need to be able to communicate super clearly with that AI. Treat it as an intern, if you will. It's an intern that has the knowledge of the universe in it, but it doesn't know what to do with it. They're coming into our organization, they know nothing about us or how we work or anything else. And if we just tell them, hey, go create a report, that'll go about as well as you think it will. And we have to get better at talking to it and communicating.
The other thing that we've learned, because what we're trying to do, again, as a professional services business, that essentially, actually not that different to what you do, where essentially we're helping our clients,
Right.
use technology to improve operational efficiency, customer experience, employee experience, etc. One of the things that we see already happening here is the relationship so we've already touched on the fact that in these experiments you're solving for very specific tasks, right? So marketing team, like, what are the things that you wish you could automate or use AI to help you do more efficiently or effectively? Same question to sales, same question to various people on the delivery side. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is, again, to your point, and what I think why people have started calling you the Dan Sullivan of tech is and again, our job as leaders is to help simplify, right? And so as we're going through this process, it's learning, and then simplifying. And one of the things we've noticed, that for any company to be ready, or organization to be ready to embrace any kind of technology, including AI, is the readiness component. Like, so what makes for AI readiness? The first thing that we see, which is consistent with what we've been doing for 10 or more years, just in the CRM space, is you have to have good, clean, organized, accurate data, right? And so don't even get caught up on all the what you should be doing with AI if your data is not in a position to actually benefit, or you're not able to benefit from having good data using AI. Because if you're using poor data, in fact, the AI is just going to accelerate bad things versus good things, right? What do you have to say about that?
Completely agree, especially if you're digging into some processes that include access to some of that data. So if I'm pulling my customer information out of the CRM or doing some reporting on that. But I think there are some opportunities where, when we start looking at personal AI literacy for ourselves as leaders and the team, where we can use AI essentially as, again, I've got that intern, it can help me with some things, and I can use it as a thought partner. I put together a prompt recently that I've exposed for folks that is it's the ability to recruit a virtual advisory board of giants. So I can tell it what issue I'm wrestling with or thinking about, whether that's marketing. In my case, I was doing some brainstorming recently about a tech go-to-market question, and I was able to bring in the personality and general background of Steve Jobs and other world-class leaders and have a dialogue with them. And so I didn't need any core data because they had that, but I was able to craft that conversation, and that was really valuable. So having a tool that I can run through some of that stuff with while folks are cleaning up their data, and they absolutely have to do that. You're right. That is the number one problem for scaling AI. But to build that AI competency, I still think folks can really start to lean in. As you said, look at kind of their week in a life. Hey, what do I do? What could I automate? And then at the same time, hey, where could I have superpowers? You mentioned EOS, something that we've been doing specifically about data. We're a services firm. Yes, our processes are documented, but a lot of our secret sauce comes in conversations. We're trying to capture transcripts of all of our internal project meetings now, and some of our sales presentations where folks are, comfortable with us doing that. That's the data. We're missing that. So I'm trying to get a couple of months of transcripts so we can then process that and aggregate it and say, hey, what are the common challenges that a customer will bring up? What are the ways we describe ourselves when we're talking about spatial computing and VR in the enterprise? And so essentially starting to build a new knowledge set that doesn't exist today.
As a matter of interest, Alex, again, I mean, does it really matter where you're archiving or keeping that data?
Good question. I would say it's, as long as it's somewhere where you control it, you're in a good place. If, for example, you're using a virtual meeting tool or something and it does the transcribing, I wouldn't use that as your archive.
No.
We use Box as our file store, whether
Oh,
you're
really?
Box, Dropbox, Google
Just
Drive,
keep it
but
simple. Yeah.
get it on a file system and control it. The same thing if you're building a prompt library. Having those files and that data makes it really easy to then drag them into your future GPT LLM of choice and ask questions about it. But yeah, having things as files, I think today is pretty important.
Just quickly for the folks who are maybe interested a little bit in the architecture, which because this is I know one of the areas where you see things so much more clearly than so many other people I've come across. Um, so for folks who are a little more advanced and are really curious to learn more about how to set this up in their business, and of course, I mean, well, and I wouldn't be asking you this question if I didn't already know that you have a true like mindset of abundance, um, and you love sharing and collective and collaborative learning. But that said, obviously, I don't expect you to reveal all your trade secrets, but
Oh, I'm happy to do that.
I figured that, but I just disclaimer kind of thing. Um, so so you mentioned Box as a great way to sort of collect all this unstructured data that's coming from conversations that your team is having with clients and prospective clients. Um, but then you also talked about eventually you want to put that into an LLM. So there's a lot of different tools that I think a lot of the conversations that we have with well internally and with clients is like, what does the tech stack, the AI tech stack look like?
That is the question because it again it changes daily. Which model is better? Which provider is better? And we're going to see so much change in the next year and churn and companies that didn't exist becoming the leader and the leaders disappearing on us. So with that, my general recommendation is picking some tools that you're comfortable with you can get started with. My general recommendation on the LLM side of things is it's typically a chat GPT just because when you get by the team level access, it makes it easy to secure it, makes it easy to build some things I can share with my team. And it's got some great capabilities to get started with. But specifically talking the LLM stuff, the key here, and again, our human and company secret sauce is how we learn to talk to the AI, the prompts that we're creating. We're going to go take that and move it to whatever the next tool is. So this is really not about what your tool of the future is. It's where do you start? What's your, hey, let's invest 6 months and start getting comfortable. In terms of some of the other pieces of the tool stack today, yes, I have Claude. Yes, I have Gemini, all that kind of fun stuff too. And for example, the book that I released this week, I wrote it, but I brainstormed a bunch of it with ChatGPT. I edited it in Claude, and then I had graphics created in Midjourney. So, leveraging a bunch of different tools, yes. But the other, as far as kind of the files for the transcripts, we use Roam, ROAM, as our digital headquarters. We're a distributed organization. And one of the great things about it is that we can set it up to auto transcribe meetings. So the transcripts are there, and there's actually an AI brain behind it. We then download those, and we're throwing them into what we set up in Box. And again, back to the privacy perspective, this isn't about telling someone, hey, Alex, you did a really poor job with that client. I want the knowledge in aggregate, so we have to be real careful this isn't Big Brother. We set up a one-way depository so that people can throw files into the proper folder. This was a sales customer conversation. This was an internal project meeting. No one in the company can see them except me. So that I'll be able to craft some of these prompts in aggregate and then bring in a team member or two. And with the commitment that, this is all about aggregate, taking names out and pulling insights out of it. So whether you're Box, Dropbox, having something like that where you can feel comfortable that not everybody's conversation is visible to the whole team, that will freak people out.
And that's, of course, that's a big component that, again, we and everybody else who's leaning heavily into this is figuring out very quickly that's probably the most sensitive piece is there any kind of client data, and making sure that whatever you're doing, the systems, whether they're manual and or technological of any kind, that you're removing any kind of specific client data, um, which again is critical. But I think it's one of those sort of necessary evils, right?
It is, and it's the kind of thing right now where customers, they're getting it that, hey, the AI note takers they're kind of normal now. So being able to have a sales conversation with someone and saying, hey, are you okay if my AI note taker is capturing notes here? We avoid the word recording because that will freak people out. Folks don't want to share freely. But if it's an AI note taker, it's different. And so just that word change has helped a lot. And we are seeing folks now where, from a pure outbound sales perspective and optimizing that, being able to use any of the recording systems that exist today, but trigger on a new recording being created, working with somebody right now who wants to take every one of those transcripts, run it through a set of rules and processing of, they run the Sandler sales method. Here's their specific process. Here's how they think about talking to their customers. How well did that salesperson do that on that call? Score them on a dozen parameters and give them suggestions of what to do next time. And by the time they've hung up the phone, within a couple of minutes, they've got an email with some personal coaching.
Yeah.
So we can start giving those superpowers of, hey, every salesperson can have a personal coach now.
I just came across another new product last week that essentially does that, but for the challenger the challenger sales process. A lot of people, who, listening to this show who are more familiar with the HubSpot ecosystem, Sandler, a few years ago, did a joint project with HubSpot because, again, HubSpot realized that if everybody's speaking the same language from a sales perspective, it's just going to make life better for everybody.
It's the simplification. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, so again, and so Sandler was built into a lot of what a lot of HubSpot partners who were looking for a sales system. It was an interesting example you just gave. But now there's someone else who's come up with a similar thing for people who like the challenger sale process model. And again, so this is what's interesting from an entrepreneurial perspective is every day people, entrepreneurs and maybe people who didn't even consider themselves entrepreneurs suddenly are having light bulb moments going, oh my gosh, I've been testing these things with AI. I have all this experience in whatever my job is. I can actually build something that is of real value, whether it's to me, my team, or who knows how many, thousands of millions of people. And this is where I think my advice is always for people who get hung up on the security and the safety and whatever, and go, oh well, in fact, they use that as an excuse not to keep going and investing.
And there's a lot of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you look at the opportunity, and which you cannot, unfortunately, you cannot see the opportunity because the opportunity only comes when you're actually doing something. And like the old analogy of, you have to have your line in the water if you're going to catch the fish, kind of thing.
Exactly. And again, trying to think back to what was our life like before the internet. That the AI is not going to change the world overnight, but over the next 5, 10, 20 years, it's going to change everything. And again, I think that's why it's so important that the whole team has to embrace it and people aren't freaking out.
Yeah, which again is yeah. It does. There's obviously a lot of risk, aversion or people who want to take risks is a real human thing, right? Which again we see showing up a lot now with a lot of the stuff that we're doing around AI. There's people are not quite sure what to, if in a business situation, not quite sure what to say. Do they give their personal opinion on AI, or do they give a more professional company based opinion? It's definitely a challenge, but it's interesting to see the difference in the mindset of people, of whether they're more risk averse or whether they're so excited that they don't really, they're not as concerned about the risks because they just see the upside as so much bigger.
And that is something that's important, that even if you are, I mean, I lean into everything. but with my eyes open. And that's again where, and whether it's ChatGPT, buying the team level account and you just have to change a couple of settings. But the simple statement is, if you're using an AI product that is free, it's not the product you are. They're using your data to do all kinds of things. Stop that. Experiment with it, but never give it company or client data. We can't. And you've got to research enough to know, okay, what level subscription do I have to buy? And there's some tools that you just can't. But that's where having just a handful of tools to kind of get the team started on, where that was actually the number one concern of our team. Once we got through the experimentation stage, it was no longer about AI is going to take my job. The primary question was, what tools can I use that aren't going to be a problem for our customers? And I would expect everybody that we're talking to here that's number one. So let's come up with a small group of tools that, hey, we've bought the right subscriptions, we know these are safe, and here's how we use them.
Yeah, and again, we're all gonna continue to learn together, for a very long time, and that's when, for example, like in our scenario, we're a Google shop, so we run on everything Google. So of course, we, like everybody else who's on Google, got the notification like a month or 6 weeks ago saying, I have access to Gemini, and we were like, okay, well, if you have any doubts about, to our team, if you have any doubts about what tool to start playing around with, just dive into Gemini. But at the same time, what I've also learned in the last month, as I've had conversations with different people in the team, and depending on their function, um, you know, you talked about Claude. Claude is, for the marketer, especially the marketer who's producing content. Claude is definitely the favorite tool, and I liked what you said about, you can use ChatGPT to do a lot of the reasoning and the thinking and the brainstorming and what have you. But then if you want to create content then from that, then use Claude, because Claude's most likely going to do a better job at this point.
And it's stringing tools together like that is perfect. I frequently use ChatGPT to create the prompt that I give to Midjourney to create images. I'll tell it the kind of images I want, and it can do that. And again, that core skill set is, how do I talk to the AI? Because you're right, there's always going to be a different, interesting tool that somebody in the team is going to lean into, and that's great.
So the next question, I wasn't sure whether I should ask, but I'm gonna ask it anyhow, and that is, someone else that you and I know and have come to respect a lot, asked a question recently about how people are using Perplexity, as it relates to search, and are people using Perplexity in place of Google for search? How do you think about that question?
I think, so stepping back from Perplexity for a second, that is one of my top 3 recommendations for folks as they're trying to just build that personal executive AI fluency of what is it, how's it work, is stop using Google. Anytime you would type into Google, instead go to the AI tool. And whether that's ChatGPT, it has the web search. Whether that's Perplexity, it has the search. It'll generate deeper, more interesting results than the typical straight up ChatGPT or Claude or other. Unless you have the ridiculously expensive $200 ChatGPT Pro account, which I am really enjoying experimenting with, and letting it run for a half hour and generate market research reports for me, and just really deep research. Not suggesting anybody run out and get that. It's worth experimenting with. I think Perplexity is great for doing the research and sourcing information. And then you can capture that, depending on what you're trying to do, and bring it back into whatever your favorite AI tool is to process it and extend and do more with it. So I think Perplexity is a great search tool. I still default to the ChatGPT, just built-in search. I'm lazy. I'm an engineer. It's there. I dive in. But if I have to go deeper, the other tools are great.
Again, 2 months ago, I wouldn't have really wanted to talk about, because there was still too much information overload. But I think it's crazy to think that in 60 days suddenly you can go from, no, let's avoid this topic for now, to, we have to talk about this topic right now.
We have to,
which is agents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and I know it was so weird, because of course one of my mentors, he doesn't know this, but one of my mentors is Dharmesh, Dharmesh Shah, co-founder of HubSpot. I follow everything that he does. I don't understand most of what he does, but I follow it anyhow because I figure I'll learn something over time. Um, but then you recently built an agent on agent.ai, the platform that he launched, less than a year ago, and it's just sort of blown up as just because, again, he being, again, also an engineer like you are. He knows that he wants to put stuff out there so that people can use it and learn together, right? This collaborative learning, which seems to be going very well, because I think there are now over 500,000 people who've signed up and are using the tool. Yeah. Um, but anyway, that's more of a side note. But what is your advice, I guess, around people who are exploring or looking at exploring agents?
So I think agents are really what's going to reinvent businesses as we get into them. And rather than agent, unfortunately, the word agent means so many different things right now.
Yeah.
We've internally really started to try to think about them as, okay, is this a digital team member, meaning it has a lot more autonomy, it can do a lot on its own? Is it something that's just, when it's triggered, it takes action? So it's not a prompt, but it's doing a process when it comes up, because there's a lot of confusion and miscommunication about that today. Agent AI, I think, is a good example of being able to build things that kind of fall into that middle category, where they're triggered and they're doing some things. There are some other platforms out there that are really focused on building, hey, this thing is going out, doing research, sending emails to people, getting the email back, and creating virtual BDRs and all that kind of interesting stuff. But that's another perfect example of those technologies are moving so fast. They're not always the most stable at this point, and I'm really interested to see where does that land in the next 6 months. But the ability to, so Agent AI is a great example. I would call it, for those that are familiar with Zapier for doing kind of process automation, it's that plus plus. But the unique element that Dharmesh, I think, has really added to it is created an ecosystem of these automations, where you can hire someone else's agent to do something. The one I had published was essentially a LinkedIn researcher. You could give it someone's name and company, and it would do the appropriate searches, dig in, and give you fundamentally a personality profile on the person based on what they had posted.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fortunate enough to be picked as their agent of the week. And a week later, 12,000 people had used it, and it was great.
Yeah.
But as you said, it's early and they're learning out loud. And that got me a chance to actually interface with a bunch of the folks behind the scenes, because I broke all kinds of stuff in the system. Because when you're pushing the limits, you're going to keep doing that. And we have to be okay with that. And I think the agents are a good example where it's not as simple as take my money and give me a virtual employee. We're not there yet. But I think we also have to be cautious that, again, if we're putting all of our AI in the agent bucket, are we leaving our team behind? I would ideally like to see members of the team suggesting, hey, we could put an AI agent or digital coworker here in our team, and we wouldn't have to hire somebody else to do that job, or we could do this function better, so we could focus over here. So it's going to be a little crunchy for the next 6 to 12 months as people are even figuring out, because starting with agents before we have that personal AI literacy of what are they and how does AI work, that's going to be hard.
As tempting as it is, and so I guess, so what you're suggesting in that case is unless, of course, you're incredibly technologically advanced, you're going to be doing more than playing with it. But so what you're saying is focus on the again, the advice is focus on the fundamentals.
The fundamentals and your people. I would say start with the people, leaning into that, not giving up on the other piece, but and there are some folks, and you and I have both heard of some folks having just really interesting successes with voice calling systems and replacing the garbage IVRs that typically exist today. And whether that's a calling system or emails back and forth, they're getting more and more interesting, and people are having success. I think the leaders of the future are really going to be determined by the companies that bake AI into their culture, not just pick one great tool or an agent to go run with.
Again, yeah, I mean, that's always, I guess, the way for us is the starting line is always, how do we solve for human plus AI, right? It's and yeah, people are probably already sick of hearing this, but I think it's worth saying again, because just in case someone hasn't heard it, and especially if it's someone who's still concerned about how to approach all this, and that is, you know, the one of the biggest fears of employees is that AI is going to take my job, and the answer is no, that is not true. But somebody who knows AI.
Yes, yes. And what those employees want to hear from us as the leaders is what's our plan with AI? And again, if they're hearing and seeing evidence that, no, I want to help give you superpowers. I want you to lean in and learn and let's do this. That makes people so much more comfortable because otherwise, whether they're an engineer, a marketer, or leader in the organization, everybody's thinking about that. As soon as we keep hearing about these deep reasoning models and all of these other things, well, when could it do my job? But you're right; it's going to be the human plus AI that wins.
I don't know what else is on your mind currently that you think might be worthwhile sharing with regards to sort of tying AI and technology into a successful scaling business.
Well, once we've got folks, so we get people past that comfort level. So they're leaning in, they're experimenting and working with it. For us, the next big phase was actually institutionalizing it and actually saying, hey, this isn't just a nice to have, hey, we gave you Excel. This is you know what, we expect you to use AI every day. So that was something we actually implemented at the end of last year. It's baked into our performance reviews. And folks are self-reporting it. We trust our people, but hey, how's that going? And leaning in and picking tools. Do we need new tools? But it's institutionalizing this culture of, and again, there are core values. We're always learning, we're always growing, and we're helping each other. But we had to live it. And I think that's something that folks have to really start looking at is how do you institutionalize it? Because again, this isn't about the technology, it's about the people. And it's getting the folks to continue moving that forward because otherwise it's just going to be a couple leaders pushing it. And again, it's a tool we can buy. And once you get that, then I think we can get beyond the just the automation pieces, which are hugely valuable, but we can get to the transformation piece because that's when you're giving an individual, like a salesperson, if we're giving them that personal sales coach, and maybe we're actually standing something up, let's say it's a pharmaceutical sales rep, they can talk to a virtual doctor. Video avatars exist right now. They're talking to a virtual oncologist because they're selling a cancer drug. They can practice their pitch. They can get real-time feedback on what I said about the medication and did I follow our process. I've just allowed that human to do incredible things they never did before. So that, to me, that's the type 2 opportunity that's our 10Xs as organizations, is where we hit those superpower capabilities for our whole team.
And are these what you just talked about now from institutionalizing and then beyond that? Is this all covered in in the book that you just launched?
It is, as far as our journey to date, absolutely. And again, and so the title is Practical AI for Leaders, but the subtitle I think is the most important thing: to save your team's jobs and rocket your business. Because it's the people and our business success, they go hand in hand. I'm also a big believer that many business books are a little too long. So this is a shorter, tight read because it was not written by AI. It was helped edited, but not written by AI. And again, it's just tried to be real. And that's where, as a simplifier, where I come in is it's about practical. And I love sharing and teaching and just helping folks lean into it. The folks that you and I hang out with, that this is going to make all the difference in the next couple of years of who's just okay and who's thriving.
Alex, on the book, I mean, because we were talking about how fast this is all moving, right? Now you launch a book, it's obvious. I'm guessing it's a print type book, even though
electronic only at this point.
Yeah, but I'm saying you're not updating it every week as things change.
Actually, I'm working on the second one as we speak.
Okay, so that was going to be
so there's going to be that series, but the people part's not going to change. That's why I started with this as the anchor. It's not about which tool, it's about the people and the culture part, which that realistically hasn't changed in a long time. Of how do we get folks to embrace something new? How do we help remove some of their fears? So I think that, to me, that's really the core of that. But Now it comes down to, so how do we really do it? What are the examples? How do I think about some of this stuff in business, and really just start sharing example after example of, okay, where is it fitting? Not that I changed my entire business's ecosystem, but this person did this to this result, and this person did this. And that doesn't mean, hey, let's have a list of 10,000 prompts to succeed. I'm tired of seeing those. That's not it. Our individuals can come up with these things themselves once they get the right mindset.
So it's interesting because it almost sounds like, so the first book is about the people component, and it sounds like the second book is somewhat about around the process in business component.
That's exactly it. And the part that I love, it's coming from the transcripts of the workshops I'm teaching. Folks are coming in, they're getting the opportunity to kind of do a choose your own adventure of, call it ChatGPT 101 or AI 101. How do we get started? And I've just been recording those. And from those transcripts, I'm extracting everything that I've said. I personally found that I create content by presenting. I don't just type it, I present. So this is wonderful for me as a tool. So anybody else who's a visual thinker, a talker, loves presenting and talking to people, record and transcribe everything personally, because you've got your personal gold in there, whether it's marketing messages or otherwise. So in this case, I'm starting to extract those pieces, and I can see a future process for being able to generate. Dan Sullivan is the master of this, of kicking out his book a month. I'm not there yet, but I'd love to be able to.
And of course, now, as you're talking about it, it just seems so much more doable and accessible, right? Again, ironically, thanks to AI, even though the topic that you're writing about is also about AI.
Absolutely. And although that right there, if I may, that's one of the traps I do see people falling into. I've had multiple people in the last week complaining about this, that with all of these great tools now built in, whether it's on the Mac or Copilot or otherwise, the person on their team that used to write a 1-sentence email now sends 4 paragraphs, obviously written by AI. Like, oh, please don't do that. No, if you're using it to create content, there's so much more thought that has to go into it. And specifically, it's the value that we as the thought leader or the person delivering the message, we have to tell all the important stuff to the AI. It will not make up the important stuff. It can do some good filler, but we can't just say, give me a LinkedIn article about why AI is going to change the world. That's not enough.
Alex, you alluded to the workshops that you're currently doing. As far as I know, those are still private workshops, or you haven't opened those up to the public yet, right?
Yes and no. So as a part of, again, doing all of this, and it's my history with my 25-year-old tech consulting business that's primarily Fortune 500 focused. We always lean in just to share and teach, and we know, hey, we're going to benefit from this in some way. I'm doing that now with all things AI. I needed a repository to actually put sample prompts and workshops and stuff. So I actually created an online community, the Leaders AI Edge, that is an invite-only community. And if maybe it makes sense, we invite the folks who are listening to this. Happy to get you the invite link for that. But the idea is it's peers. It's, again, leaders who want to help with our own AI fluency and literacy, and how do we apply it in our teams. So it's not the prompt library of 10,000 things. Yeah. So I'm actually rolling out my workshops there. I made a commitment actually at our last strategic coach get together that I'm going to be running 10 workshops in 10 weeks. And we're going to cover 10 different topics. The first one coming up is, again, the basics of prompt writing. And it's not ChatGPT 101, it's prompt writing. And how do I talk to an AI better? And then it will move into, how do I build tools that my whole team can use? How do I create graphics? And I'm bringing in some interesting leaders from the industry to help guest into those as well, so that we can all learn together.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so cool how you're so giving, and I mean, I totally get it, but it's so cool to see you sharing your knowledge, but I know at the same time there probably is, I mean, because I'm the same way. I absolutely believe that the best way to learn is to teach, right? And I think you might agree with that sort of approach.
Oh, definitely. And I love the conversations it generates. And for me, this is, I won't say it's a labor of love, because it's who I am. I mean, at my core, I'm an applied technology geek, and tech is supposed to help us thrive at work. And so this is my why. It is my unique ability, and I love that. The one thing I'm still looking for as I go through the getting folks enabled is, I'll figure out how to commercialize this, and I'll find some folks that'll actually as collaborators, help me figure that out. So that's my future expectation. Is it's going to take a couple of us to figure out where do we go with this.
Which, of course, is something that we also talk about when we get together, every 90 days. And I think what we're all working towards is the collaboration of all our combined experience and learnings, and how do we just make that even more valuable by through partnerships and collaborations.
Absolutely. And again, I think AI ends up being a great glue to bring a bunch of that together. Because now, in the old days, if it was technology, we needed APIs to connect all of these systems and these companies together. Well, AI might be a good way to help bring us together with some common messages and common capabilities.
So I want to ask you one sort of controversial question, and that is, and the thing is, it was put out there by some of the most senior, leaders and CEOs of some of the biggest SaaS companies in the world, which is, SaaS is dead, right? And they're saying that, whether it's Microsoft or you name it, that they're saying that because to your earlier example of how we've evolved from electricity to the internet, and now AI being the latest version of electricity, the it's evolved to a point where what SaaS was built over the last 20 plus years to solve for is no longer needed. So anything that SaaS was solving for, in the last 20 years, let's say, is going to have to evolve and change. And they're putting it out there that the most so the most agile and the people who know what they're doing, who can move really fast, are going to have the ability to replace what SaaS is today with whatever the some I've heard some people refer to it as SaaS will become RaaS. So it's, instead of just software as a service, it's results as a service, which is already fairly closely aligned with what AI is essentially doing. But how do you think about the future of SaaS, and what do you think is a realistic timeline for SaaS being either whether they replace themselves, whether it's HubSpot or Microsoft or Salesforce, or the people in the CRM ecosystem, whether they replace themselves or someone else replaces them? What does that look like from your perspective?
Definitely a controversial topic, and I think it's freaking a lot of people out. So going back to if my whole team now knows how to talk to an AI, and I can make requests and I can invent, essentially English will become the most common programming language very shortly, because it's just going to be, as long as I can describe a process to the AI, I can get my result. Now, that said, if we look at what existed before SaaS, well, we had software that we installed on our computers. We had software that we ran on the servers in our offices. And going to SaaS didn't kill that market, but it absolutely forced every one of those companies to evolve. And I think we're going to see the exact same thing here, which is, do I need that HubSpot user interface? Maybe not, but I need somewhere for the data to live. I need somewhere for common business rules to live, because you and I need to think about things the same way if we're in the same company trying to do the same job. Where does that live? So the applications of today, number one, they have got to become more open. They're going to have to be AI accessible, so that no matter what AI platform I'm using, I can get to my HubSpot data, my other CRM data, my website reporting from analytics. That has to be accessible, and a bunch of systems today are not. That's been one of the interesting things to see, and I'm going to say purely experimentally, with the ChatGPT operator, where you can fire up a web browser that the AI controls, and I've tried this, and have it log into the CRM. And for example, I can give it a spreadsheet and say, hey, here's a bunch of records I want you to create in it, and it'll just walk through and do that work. Now, having to pretend to be a human, it's an interesting academic exercise, but if there was just an API the AI could just poke at, that's what we really need. So more interconnected systems, that's where I'm hoping the HubSpots of the world and the other organizations of the world go, is exposing things in a way that's not just a programmatic interface, but an AI interface that the AI can bring to us to say, oh, okay, I know your data's over here. Which stuff are you actually looking for? So there's absolutely going to be an evolution. I think we will have new leaders in every one of those categories within 5 years.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. It has to.
Yeah.
And some of that is that people are going to build really interesting, again, business logic and business rules that help us do things that we had never dreamed of before.
Right.
So that, I think that's going to, it is going to allow great opportunities. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. It makes a lot of sense. And I spent most of my life in Africa. I was born there, and I lived most of my life in Africa until all but 20 years, pretty much. And one of the things that you see from a technology perspective in Africa is that in most African countries they don't adopt every round of technology as it comes out. They typically skip 2 or 3, but but there's been like case study after case study of the benefits for the African countries that do that, and they're not doing it by choice. They're doing it because they just cannot move fast enough, or they don't have the resources, financial or otherwise, to do it. But like phone systems, for example, I mean, there were like half the continent didn't have access to a phone, and then suddenly, so they for the decades of analog phones, half the continent never had access to a phone, and if they did, they have to walk 5 or 10 miles to get to a public phone or whatever. Um, so when mobile technology came out, it completely
Mm-hmm.
transformed the African landscape.
Oh yeah, letting them leapfrog and not have a whole bunch of legacy infrastructure. Yes.
Exactly. And I think it's going to the opposite extreme, like on the AI front now. So, for example, OpenAI, which is arguably leading, the charge. They didn't exist a few years ago, and no one knew what. So they've leapfrogged, whoever the so-called incumbents were before they came around, um, because they were nimble, and they could just kind of racing without any baggage, right?
And it doesn't mean you need to have billions of dollars of funding, but it means that you're able to lean into, now in OpenAI's case, I'll say, attacking AI broadly, that's a big, broad, challenging mission. For those of us that are focused on particular areas where we're helping organizations, where can we be leaning in? And it's something I'm challenging my team on daily. There is no business as usual anymore. This is gonna, again, it's the next. We pivoted our entire organization actually in 2008, where we used to do back end development, embedded software, web systems, banking systems, and otherwise. As soon as I saw the iPhone, we switched to doing mobile, but specifically it was where people touch the technology. That's where we needed to be because we were all about the employee and user experience. I see the same thing happening here of, okay, who's going to be brave enough to pivot? Again, this isn't about the tech. This is, how does this help empower the people? What changes? And we have to keep experimenting to figure it out.
You're absolutely right, and it's just on a personal note. You and I have never talked about this. I just realized, but that was very much that '08 period when Facebook had just become a thing, and the first iPhone had launched. That is essentially what where Dynamico comes from. That's what led to the birth of Dynamico too.
And that was such a huge wave coming through of a different way to think about technology and how we approach it for people. Yeah.
Again, because it was just a complete leveling of the playing field, where, to your point, suddenly people had the power of the technology in their hands. Again, one of the best African analogies I can think of was, I think it was on the front page of the New York Times or some big, newspaper, where they were talking about a sheep herder in Africa now had more power in his hand with a mobile phone than Ronald Reagan had as the president of the United States.
Well, and that's exactly where AI comes in, is it gets to every individual, and it really does democratize access to technology. Mobile was huge in doing that, and now we've got a piece of hardware, but the AI as a software takes that to the next level.
Alex, in the last 20 seconds, any last words of advice?
Here's my environment. Here's what I'm looking like. And again, wrapping that last 20 seconds, the key is we've got to be literate with this ourselves. We can't delegate it to one person. And we've got to start getting into our teams.
Yes, that's awesome. Alex, thanks so much for calling in. It's so good to catch up, and we should catch up again offline as well.